Good morning. We're going to continue with, and I may finish with, but I don't think I will probably. But the subject of fulfillment for a daughter, and the subject that came to my mind a couple of weeks ago when I had the opportunity to attend some graduation ceremonies. One of my grandchildren was involved, and is involved in it, and I had the privilege of uh, watching parents, grandparents, teachers, people that were representing other colleges and universities that were providing rewards and money that would go toward the additional education of the graduate from high school. And it was impressive to me, but very sad to me to see the amount of pressure that I believed was being put on young girls to feel like in order to choose a career and get an education to enable them to function in that career and then be successful in life, they needed to really devote a huge amount of time, energy, and in some cases, I've heard the stories of some of the family members and some of the how intensely they've been pushed as by their parents in some cases, and in other cases by just the challenges of wanting to be to succeed and wanting to be successful and get, of course, a high grade a level or grade score, and to enable them to go on to get additional education in order to find fulfillment in their career, and of course, at the same time, really to be able to look back at the end of their life when they got to my place, let's say, in life, when when they got to be 86 years old, and they could look back and say, "Do you think your life has been fulfilling or not?" They could say, "Yeah, I think it was great. I think it was worthwhile. I believe I was a value to society, maybe a positive influence in my culture, and I'm grateful that I did what I did." And the reason it concerned me is because, based on what I know about the Bible, they don't seem to be. Now, this isn't true of everybody, so I'm not trying to use a broad brush on everybody, but uh, because I do know some young ladies that have basically said what my wife said before she was my wife and before she was the wife of someone else who has since gone home to be with the Lord. But my wife said to her parents, and at the time she married the first time, her primary desire in life was to be a wife and a mother. And she was looking forward to that, and she wanted to achieve that, and she did. And I believe that's a desire that a young woman should have. That doesn't say if she feels she needs or wants or doesn't see marriage in the immediate future, and she wants to get more education. I'm sure, as I'm going to try to point out this morning from the Bible, that there are uh, a lot of things that you could learn by continuing on in school that could be used as a wife to facilitate you being a helper to your husband the way God designed women to be. In other words, you as a woman, any woman, I'm not trying to pick a certain race, color, anything, any part of the country, any woman God created with the abilities basically to be what is needed on the part of a husband as a helpmeet for him, as it's described in the Bible, as a wife. And to me, to demean motherhood, to look down on people that are housekeepers or homemakers or wives to their husbands, and particularly those that don't go out into the corporate world, let's say, and try to climb the corporate ladder to be successful in in earning money in competition with men in the world in which we live. That's a distraction that isn't, as I understand the scriptures, going to facilitate uh, a young woman at the end of her life, even if she never marries and makes a huge amount of money, possibly becomes the president of the United States, if such a thing could happen, and did happen or does happen, that she would find more fulfillment in that secular endeavor than what she would receive from being what God designed all women to be, and that is a helpmeet to a husband. Because the point I'm trying to make is not that that's lesser position, or really I'm not trying to make out that it's a greater position, but it's certainly an equally valuable and equally rewarding position of being a husband and a father. Because God designed men to function as the head of the home and the head of the marriage relationship, and God designed women to be a helpmeet to their husbands. And God is, and all of us, if we will stop and think about the marvel of God's creation, God is an amazing engineer, an amazing scientist, amazing. He knows all about it. And we can look at the sun, the moon, the stars. We can look at the relationship of the planets to each other and the effect on the weather, and where the sun and the moon and the stars are going to be at certain times, and the pattern that they travel, and they consistently work, and it provides a comfortable place for you and me to live on the earth. And it's interesting that, of course, God gave instruction to fathers, and he gave instruction to wives, and he gave instruction to mothers, and he gave instruction to children. And it's the responsibility of fathers to bring up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And in contrast, the fathers are told, don't frustrate your children. In Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And in Colossians 3:21, the Lord tells fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And fathers can do that by devoting all their time, energies, and attention to career and making money and more money and building a reputation, and ignoring basically the needs of their children and the privilege that God has given them to train their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so when you get to the question of what can a father and mother encourage their children to do, that their daughters particularly we're talking about, so that they will look back and say, well, I didn't accomplish anything because all I was a wife to my husband and a mother, and I kept home, and that's all I did. And that's not much. Lots of people do that. That's not a very high achievement. And maybe women look up if they're not focused right on people that maybe have been economically far more successful than they and their husband together have been, maybe in saving money and investing money and building the benefits of interest and compound interest and all that it is that's a part of the investment field, and feel like we really didn't do anything. We raised 3 children, maybe, or 5 children, or I have a grandson that has 6 children. But that's all we did. We just raised 6 kids. Well, but what is more important than being able to bring up children, whether it's 1, 2, or 10? I think the most children I know of someone that had, I think, was 10. That's a less rewarding, less fulfilling use of one's life than becoming the president of the United States. And I have nothing against the president of the United States. I think that the one we have now is doing as well as any president I know anything about. But to think that that's to raise children and the next generation of children to where they're healthy physically, godly, spiritually, and living a life to bring honor and glory to the Lord Jesus Christ is as important as anything, in my understanding of the scripture, that anybody could do. And I think we ended last Tuesday night, we were trying to work our way through Proverbs 31. And I won't go back and repeat what I went over, but we got about halfway through the proverb. And it describes the characteristics and the abilities that God designed into the building of that part of humanity that we call a woman. And he designed her and built her to have abilities that can be used in the structure that he intended primarily that she function, and that is in relationship to a man who's called her husband and who becomes the father of their children, and who has the responsibility under God to bring up his children, and the necessity that God recognized that he have a wife, the necessity that God designed that woman to have some far-reaching, and really, when you read Proverbs 31, pretty amazing abilities. And yet I hear people, I've heard all my life, which I don't believe is true, but people that thought that their wives couldn't make decisions or their wives didn't use logic, and some wives don't. That's true. But there's also a significant number of men I know that don't use very good logic either. But so that's a common problem that human beings have to deal with. Sometimes we don't use the brain power that God gave us. But to me, it's interesting that this Proverb 31 is the words of a king by the name of Lemuel, and in my not great effort, but mild effort to try to find out who King Lemuel was, I found out that maybe nobody knows, and maybe he wasn't a person anyway. In some people's idea, he just represented a certain group of people or something like that. But he had a mother, and his mother taught him what it takes to have a virtuous woman. And a virtuous woman who is a wife and a mother has the potential of being completely fulfilled in her life. And she has a lot of potential ability to do a great variety of things. And that's what we started reading this Psalms 31 but we were about halfway through. But it makes a parallel. King Lemuel's mother makes a parallel between uh, a virtuous woman and the scarcity of a virtuous woman and the gemstone we call rubies. And in verse 10 of Proverbs 31, she says, "Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies." Well, I did a little, again, research like I'm inclined to do sometimes, and it comes out that rubies apparently, based on what I could get off of Google, are among the most valuable of gemstones. And the number that I saw was that a carat was worth about $15,000. If you had a diamond that was a carat size, it'd be worth about $15,000. And a ruby called a pigeon's blood ruby was worth $25,000. Well, that's a lot of money. And so, and it apparently was back in the days of Solomon, or at least the days of King Lemuel's mother, but it still is. It still is. That's the price I mentioned is what's quoted as current value. So it's wrong. It's a crime, as far as I'm concerned, to try to make any female feel. I don't care how old she is, whether she's 100 or whether she's 10 or 1 month, to try to influence any female to feel that God didn't design her with the ability to do everything that God knew she would need to do at some point in time as she functioned in relationship to the man that she marries, which is what God's design was for her to function in relationship to that man. But she has value, tremendous value. And I think I've spent the most of my ministry trying to help women believe they have value. And to prove that they have value and to prove that they have worth and to prove that they don't need to compete with the men. They're not in the same ball game. And so both can have value and it can be equal value, but not necessarily equal authority in the marriage relationship. And it's not a put down for women. It's not because they can't think. It's not because they can't do. This woman described in Proverbs 31, almost anybody would be glad to have her running his business, even if he just hired her. And really, to me, that's what's happening. Men in the corporate world are using the abilities that were designed into women to function in relationship to their husband, and men managing businesses. They're capitalizing on that. And those women, and I'm not saying it's always wrong, or maybe I'm sure that sometimes it is wrong, because if a woman has a husband, that should be a priority. If a woman has children, that should be a priority. If a woman, unless it's in order to put food on the table and keep her family from starving, a woman who goes outside of the home and begins to try to climb the corporate ladder, she may be misplacing her value. And in that case, she's getting in trouble. But her value, women are not, should not be of less value than men are. They're not. I'm sorry. And so this woman is identified as a virtuous woman, or as I will apply, a potentially fulfilled woman when she gets to the end of her life. Uh, there's a number of things that she does, and it starts out in the 11th verse of Proverbs 31 saying that the heart of her husband safely trusts in her. And I'm going to move on to where we were on Tuesday night, and 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 we'll be in verse 17 of Proverbs 31. And it's interesting that verse 17 of Proverbs 31 deals with her physical health and strength. And this person who is a virtuous woman, it says she girds herself with strength. I would understand that means she keeps herself in good physical shape. She isn't soft and flabby and it doesn't have any muscle tone. In fact, to reinforce my thought of what that's saying, it says in the second part of that same verse, she girds herself with strength and she strengthens her arms. And then verse 18 says she perceives that her merchandise is good. Okay, when you read through here, you find that there's a lot of areas where they're generating income for the family in crops, in the product of the vineyard, in making cloth, in selling cloth. These are things that, and I'm assuming, which I think is fairly accurate, that this is describing what we would call a farmer's life or an agricultural setting. So there's if you have chickens and your chickens lay eggs and you get more eggs than you can eat, you could sell some eggs. And if you have corn and barley planted, why you harvest the corn and barley, and if you take some of it to eat, and you sell some of the rest. And if you have a vineyard, you have grapes, and you have grape juice, and you have the potential for wine, and you have the potential for raisins, and you can sell those products. And all of that is part of the earning ability of this, you might say, family unit called a husband and wife. And if you have children, generally they're involved in doing it. And in most cases, you have hired help of some kind. Whether it's hired and paid or whether it's slaves, let's hope it's the former, hired and paid. But there's merchandise. And verse 18 says that this virtuous woman keeps track of their merchandise, what they're going to sell, to make sure it's good. Okay, she has to know how. She has to be able to identify what's good merchandise, and whether it's coming from the chickens or from the cattle or from the sheep or from the goats or from whatever crops they're raising, she has to have the knowledge to look at it or look at the product in the process and say, we keep doing this, that's going to be good. That's going to make us good money. Or we better change something because that's not going to turn out too good and we're not going to get too much money for it. And this is just in the framework of a helpmeet to her husband. And her husband, as we read the account, is going to be a man that's respected and sits with the elders in the gate of the city, is there for advice and in some cases judgment, depending on the situation. But she knows enough to know whether the product that's coming out of their farm or their agricultural pursuits, whether it's going to make money or not make money. Now that you live today, if you do in 2026 and are married and have a husband, and well, you probably don't have if you live where I live, I'm looking out of the room I use as an office, and I got house after house after house after house, and there's about maybe 10 feet, 20 feet in between the two houses, all the way around me, everywhere. And we could plant a garden, all right, and we maybe could sell some something from it, but that's not a big deal for my wife. That's not something we do. We plan on is making money from the land or from growing something or from some business venture that we do. Now then, what do we do? Well, my income at the present time is primarily from for rental properties that we have, and Social Security, and it's more than enough for us to live comfortably. And but there's a lot of things that my wife knows about cleaning houses, repairing houses, talking to renters, calling people to make sure that there's the money. If the money doesn't come in, and she calls somebody and says, "Hey, don't see the rent check. Where's the money?" And there's application. If even though most of us, probably within the sound of my voice, don't live on a farm or don't have agricultural pursuits that we make much of, if any, money out of, or that we invest in. But in this case, this person is in that category, and she knows how to do some things. So she checks on the quality of her products. She works late at night. It says the lamp doesn't go out by night. So there's times when she has to work late. She takes her and stretches her hand, it says, to the distaff and holds the spindle, and understand that that means that she knows how to take cotton or wool or whatever it is, and how to spin it and make cloth out of it. She knows how to do it. And I don't think it means she's doing all the work, but she's supervising, she's taking care of the home. She's a keeper at home. And in this particular environment, she and her husband have these kinds of activities going on, and she's engaged. She's engaged in it, and she's involved in it. Uh, then it says that she's considerate of other people. She extends her hands to the poor. In other words, she's like all of us. We're in an environment, probably most all of us anyway. Most all of us are in an environment where we have poor people around us. In some places, we're in areas where there are people sleeping on the streets, people that are hungry, and she's concerned about it. This virtuous woman is concerned about it. In verse 20, it says she extends her hands to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hand to the needy. So yes, she's got a lot going, and it's producing income and things, and yet she is concerned for the poor, and she does something to be of help to them. In verse 21, it says she's not afraid of the snow for her household, okay, because it's getting cold, winter's coming, because she has clothes made for them that are made out of scarlet material. I don't know that the color necessarily makes them any warmer, but that's kind of a common practice in some areas, that for winter clothes it tends to be bright colors or red sometimes. And so she sees to it that her family and her servants and all of those, that they're taken care of as far as having warm clothes for the winter. Verse 22 says she makes tapestry for herself. Well, I understand that's probably something that's woven together in a picturesque and a picture, something that sometimes is on a floor covering, sometimes it's maybe a bedspread on a blanket on a bed. Sometimes it could be a jacket or a scarf or something. But she makes tapestry for herself. And her clothing is made out of fine linen and purple. Now, it doesn't necessarily say she makes all of that clothing, but it's it's adequate. It's a little bit better than the just middle of the run clothing. Then it talks about her husband in verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And then it goes in verse 24 to she makes linen garments and sells them. So in this case, she knows how to at least supervise and hire people and motivate people to do what it takes to come up with linen garments, and then she sells them. She supplies sashes for the merchants. I assume that's something that she made, and then they sell it. And it goes on to say in verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing. So again, she takes care of herself. She's honest, honorable person, and that's the way she's known. She shall, and then it goes on to say about her potential fulfillment. She shall rejoice in a time to come. It pays off. It pays off. And she can do it. And her husband can trust in her. And he doesn't have to worry about whether she's cheating on him in any way, financial, economically, sexually, otherwise. She's a responsible, respectable person. And then in verse 26, it talks about her verbal communication. She's not a gossip and she's not bitter. She opens her mouth with wisdom. And part of that is you know when not to talk as well as when to talk. And you know what to talk about as well as not to talk about. She opens her mouth with wisdom. And on her tongue is the law of kindness. I wonder how many of us, when we talk, really check ourselves as to whether what we're saying is coming across kindly, or at least that's our goal, to come across kindly. Well, a virtuous woman, or a woman that's going to be potentially fulfilled as she goes through life, that's part of her success. Is she has the wisdom and the knowledge that in spite of all the things that she's having to deal with, and when you look at all the areas that she's controlling and motivating people and paying people for doing and collecting from people who are buying, and there's a lot of times when there's things that come up that are not so smooth. And yet she, on her tongue is the law of kindness, and what she says is controlled by wisdom. And verse 27 says she watches over her household, and she does not eat the bread of idleness. And then this is going back to the result again. Her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband also praises her. That's a significant part of a woman's feeling of fulfillment. Her children praise her and appreciate her, and her husband praises her. And it goes on to say, many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. So a woman that can be married to a man and live in a household where there's as much stuff going on as this woman, and of course, if the person we're talking about is the wife to a king, that would be understandable. She'd have a lot of this kind of stuff going on, but her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Now, there's a woman that can keep all these balls in the air, and and really what this is saying, this is the inspired word of God, I didn't write it, is that within the skill set, you might say, that women have, they can do all of this. Now, some of them are going to do it better than others. Some of them may do it because and obviously everybody doesn't get the same training, the same exposure, the same opportunity to do all of these things. Uh, However, if you were married to a king, I assume you would have at your options a lot of this kind of stuff that you could do. But many daughters have done well, but this particular woman has excelled them all. And then it says in verse 30, charm is deceitful. I hear about people that send their daughters to charm school. I've read about it. I don't know that I've heard about it. But, well, that there's some value in teaching people how to be polite and courteous and to know when to talk and when to listen and how to be appropriately aggressive and not be inappropriately aggressive. Charm is deceitful. People can act like they like you. They can smile. They can when they hate your guts. But the fact of the matter is that it's sometimes charm is not legitimate, and beauty is passing. No matter how beautiful you are, as you get older, it will decline, or at least it will change. Uh, the outward man will perish, we're told. And we've seen it around us. And if you're my age, just look in the mirror or see how you walk or whatever it is that your problem happens to be. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. A woman who fears the Lord. And that's not talking about cowering fear that God's going to be mean to you or God's going to judge you or God's going to take something from you or deprive you of something, but an awesome respect. In other words, God has told men and women how they're supposed to relate to each other, how they're supposed to treat each other, and He has designed us so that we have the characteristics that will enable us to do that if we really have an awesome respect for the Lord. If we don't, then we probably won't, and then we won't be considered a virtuous woman, and then whatever we pursue, we're likely not to feel fulfilled at the end of our life. But so it's not based on good manners or charm, and beauty is a wonderful thing, beautiful thing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she's going to be praised. Now, she may be very physically beautiful too, and she may be very charming. I know some Christian women that fit that category, and so it's not a negative to be a woman any more than it's a negative to be a man. And all human beings have, in the way we're born into this world, and we'll talk a little bit about it before we get through, but all of us have a carnal, sinful nature. And it will motivate and try to influence us, regardless of whether we're men or women, to not do what God intended and tells us to do in the marriage relationship, in raising our children, in pursuing a career, whatever it is. Our Adamic nature will try to motivate us not to do within the capability of what we can do, because God designed us to be able to do it. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. God the next verse says, give her the fruit of her hands. So if you look through back this list, and I'll look at a recap of it in just a minute, but in Proverbs 31, so in other words, she's doing these things and not doing some things. And so what the exhortation is, give her the fruit of her hands and let her own works praise her in the gates. It's a fulfilling occupation to be a homemaker. It's a fulfilling occupation to be a husband or a wife. It's a fulfilling occupation to be a quote, help meet to your husband. And so when young ladies become young ladies and they start looking to the future, it's right for them to want to get married. They were designed to be married. It's important that, first of all, they accept Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. And secondly, that they're not interested in becoming involved sexually with somebody who they're not married to. And number two, that they become married to somebody who hasn't accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as their personal Savior and who is not committed to serve the Lord, doesn't have the fear of the Lord that would motivate him as a husband to love a young lady as his wife, to love her as Christ loves us. Because that's the criteria that the Bible gives. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. And so when we live in a world where a high percentage of people get involved sexually before marriage and maybe instead of marriage and in addition to marriage with somebody other than the one they're married to, and it doesn't work out too good, yeah, it's not gonna. The wages of sin and fornication and adultery are sin in God's eyes. The wages of sin is death. It's death. But again, if we allow God to guide and direct us in our life, then every woman has potentially the ability to do what it takes to be a helper to a husband, her husband. And God designed you that way. God designed you that way. And God didn't design any man to function that way. He designed men to function as fathers and the head of the home and the one that's responsible for the outcome in the final analysis of how the home goes. But I went through Proverbs 31 because I don't know, somehow I like to get things down where I can see them in a list. But and I tried to spell out the criteria that's stated in Proverbs 31. And when you go through it and you say, okay, this is what God intended that a wife, this is within the parameter, you might say, of the things that God intended that a wife be able to do. That doesn't mean every wife is able to do them. And there are some things that God intended that a wife be able to do as a helpmeet. Let's just start with Adam and Eve, with helpmeet to Adam that Adam couldn't do without a helpmeet. And also there were things that Adam needed to do that God told him he wanted him to do that no man can do. And people that get the, I don't know what, stupid is kind of a crude word, but the stupid idea that a woman can do anything a man can do, only better, Or maybe they're more humble and they'll say, well, a man and woman can do anything a man can do. No, a woman can't. And it would be just as stupid to say a man can do anything that a woman can do, because they can't. They can't. And anybody that has any sense of observation knows they can't. They know they can't. And the most obvious affects the physical conformation of males versus female people. And no man can conceive by producing an egg that gets fertilized in his body and can grow up and been discharged from his body, born into the world, and be able to feed an infant. Men can't do that. They can't do that. Women can. And you say, well, yeah, but that's the only thing. No, that's not the only thing. And people who think that they're doing some kind of honor to women by saying, well, we want to get the women out on the front lines because in a war, because we don't want anybody thinking that the men can do something the women can't do. That's just foolishness. Yeah, they die, both die. If you take a bullet in the head, man or woman, you're out of here in all probability. So, but and a man can pull the trigger and a woman can pull the trigger. That's true. That's true. But the reason that generally, traditionally, intelligent people don't send women out on the front lines is because they know that the women can do something in bringing taking care of the children that they've brought into this world that men can't do. And they want to protect them, and they don't want them being cannon fodder if they can avoid it. And so it's the whole premise or the idea that there's supposed to be a war between the sexes, and men are trying to put women down, and I'm not saying that some men aren't trying to put women down. I believe actually the people that are trying to rob women are like Satan in the Garden of Eden. He wasn't trying to help Eve. He was trying to do exactly what he did. He deceived Eve. And we're told in the scriptures that Adam wasn't deceived, but he went along with it. But that's another part of the story. But looking at this list that I'm looking at on my computer right now, it's two columns, runs the top of the page to the bottom of the page. And it covers almost everything. And I'm going to take the time to run the list, but the purpose is women don't let somebody come along and say that women are stupid, women can't think, women can't use logic, women can't. But do remember that it's also true in the Bible that women were the ones that were deceived by Satan. But the list starts out, her husband can trust her. That's pretty important if you're going to marry someone as a wife and have an intimate relationship with them as a wife and share your assets and all of those kinds of things. She is careful with his money. She does him good and not evil. Now you couldn't do not good and not do evil, try to stay neutral, but she does him good. She's committed to taking care of him, being what she can and should be to him, doing it honestly and straightforward. So it's good, but not evil. As far as projects and products, she gets wool and flax to make cloth. And she gets She works with her hands. She's not just standing around telling people what to do, but she works with her hands. And she's kind of like a merchant ship that brings food from afar. So they maybe raise something, some food in their agricultural pursuits, but then some of it has to come from, let's say, another part of the country. She's going after it. She's going to get it like a merchant ship and bring it back so that they'll have it to use. Uh, she is up early in the morning to start work, and she provides food for her household. I don't understand if that means she's cooking every egg and scrambling every egg, or making the toast, or making all the bread, or whatever. But she's seeing to it that it gets done. And she's probably telling the servants or the cooks or the whoever's doing the actual hands-on work what she wants prepared and how she wants it prepared and when she wants it ready, and probably how she wants it served. So she's a pretty sharp gal. In fact, if you look at all the things that she does, she's really a very, very sharp gal. She she provides food for her household. She gets a field, and she's able to purchase it with her profits, and she buys a vineyard. Okay, that's not indicative of somebody that doesn't know how to do business, or to buy something, or maybe to see a piece of property for sale and then evaluate the price of the property and how much money they can make with the vineyard or with whatever crop they plant on it, and then take some of the profit that she's made from other endeavors and buy a piece of land. It goes on to say she's in good physical shape, and she has strength in her arms, also physical. Uh, she checks the quality of what she's producing and maintains that and makes sure it's good quality. She extends her hand to the poor people. She's concerned for poor people. She's not poor, and she's got all she needs, and she's got extra, and she shares it with the poor. And she reaches out her hand to the needy, is the second point. And she's not worried about the winter for her family and her servants, because she's gotten clothing for them, or made clothing for them that's red and in scarlet. And she makes tapestries for herself. And her own clothing is made of fine linen and purple. So she's not sloppy. She's not she doesn't disregard her appearance. She takes care of herself too. Her husband, because of their success, of his success, he's respected in the gates of the city, and so he sits in the gates of the city, and with the elders of the city. And then it says she makes linen garments and sells them. So that's another type of industry. Uh, and she makes sashes, and she sells those to the merchants. And she strength and honor are her clothing. She's not a wimp. She's not a cowering. She's not a coward. She has strength, and she can say her mind. And she says her mind with wisdom. We'll read later on. Oh, we've already read it, but I'll recap it. She strength and honor her clothing, and she's going to rejoice in a time to come. There's probably times when she's pretty tired. If I look at all she's got going, I would be tired. And then strength and honor her clothing, and she will rejoice in the time to come. She will find satisfaction. She will find purpose. She watches over her ways of her household. In other words, she supervises. She keeps track of what's going on in her household. Well, she's got vineyards and she's got linen and she's got wool and she's got cloth making and she's got clothes making and she's selling and she's buying land and she's planting the vineyard and she's supervising the harvesting of the crop. And she's no dummy. And anybody, if I were wanting to run a business, any kind of business, I'd like to have her running my business. I really would. And so would any other person that was trying to run a business. And a lot of the people that you find that are successful women who work successfully for other men or corporations to run businesses, that they don't realize that what these people who have the business or the corporations are doing is capitalizing on the abilities that God gave to women. The abilities. I heard a gentleman that was on a talk show, and he made a comment about people. His thing is primarily to invest in other people's businesses, and he buys a percentage of their business. And he was on a TV program that was specializing in that. I don't want to be any more specific than that, but I heard something that he wrote that he said, I find that women who we loan money to and tell them how to run their business are much more successful than the men, or maybe didn't say much more, but are more successful than the men percentage wise. And I think somebody asked him why he thought that was true. And he said, well, women generally will do what we tell them to do, and men often won't do it. They have their own way they want to do it. Okay, so why is that? I mean, I think that's true, and I don't think that means that he was trying to take advantage of a woman or trying to take advantage of a man. But why is it that way? Well, it's that way because God designed women to be a helper to this particular individual when they borrow money from him. And they're willing to do, because the other thing that women are supposed to be is submissive to their husbands. And so it makes sense. It makes sense. And so it's important, and I'm out of time. It's important that women realize, you can do what God would have you do. That is a prerequisite to coming to the place in your life that you feel fulfilled at the end of it. You can do it because God gave you the ability. He designed it in you. Just like I commented the other day, I got tractors, I've got two trucks and the car. Okay, they all do basically the same thing, but they're radically different because they were designed to function in a different relationship to life. And the same is true with men and women. We're designed different, but we're designed good by God. And I'll finish this up, Lord willing, this coming Tuesday. May the Lord bless you. Goodbye. Here I can get. Look, shut